Stories My Father Told Me is an essay which is written by Helen Zogaib. Storytelling is a way for knowledge to be passed from one generation to the next. Many of the stories in this selection have a moral or lesson that can be learned. The author collected these stories from her father. They tell about his life growing up in the Middle East and moving to the United States. Helen Zogaib started her essay saying that one day 10 years ago, while they were having dinner filled with her father's stories about his childhood and youth in Damascus and Lebanon, her mother said that someday they ought to see her father or they ought to record her father's stories about his youth. Many of these stories were about his parents, were about experiences with his parents and his parental grandparents. A few weeks later, the Gallery Al Quds in Washington, D.C., asked her to consider developing work for a solo exhibition. At that time, she had an idea which is adding her father's stories to this exhibition, and they welcomed the idea. In the beginning, her father refused the idea, explaining that these were private family stories, but he accepted by the end. We noticed that the father and the daughter are allowed to special intimacy during their conversations. And don't forget that this is the main focus of our unit, which is the relation between parents and their children. So, when they get to work or when they got to work, the daughter used to paint the stories her father told her. She was able to give these stories new life. This article is attached by 3 of the father's stories, and all of them have a moral or a lesson to be learned. The first story is called Charity and Compassion. The father decided to start with this story because when his father told him about it many years ago, he told him that this story is very important and its moral is important and he shouldn't forget it. By going through the events, we will find that the moral of this story is it's important to keep compassionate and kind towards others and to feel sympathy towards them, even if this costs you something precious. Making raisins and drying figs. This is the second story in which the speaker expresses how much he and his sister loved visiting their grandparents in the mountain. And also he expresses the process of making raisins and drying figs. He goes through the details of these processes, starting from harvesting the figs with his grandfather. And if we're talking about the moral of this story, we will find that one of the morals is to move or how the traditions move from or pass down from one generation to another. It's important to notice that there are some details in this story are specific to the culture from which the story comes from. For example, the style of clothing, the type of the basket, and the way of gathering and laying out the fruit seem particular to the culture. The types of fruit and herbs point to the regions in the Middle East where Elia Kamal Zogaib grew up. Harvesting figs and making raisins are tasks specific to regions where such fruit can be grown. These activities happen in many parts of the Middle East. Planting olive trees is the third story, and this story is quite similar to the previous one. In this story, we find that the speaker expresses his happiness and his excitement while visiting or when visiting his grandparents in the mountains. And he also shows that visiting them is like a treat for them, for him and his sister. And here there is an important question, which is why each visit to the mountain a treat? How do the visits strengthen the relationship between the author's father and his grandparents? Visiting Jiddo and Teta was like a treat for him because Jiddu and Tata make special provisions for the boy. Jiddu takes him on his errands and gives him special jobs to do. They show the boy that they care for him and they give him responsibilities too. There is another important question, which is what is the grandfather's main reason for planting olive trees, and what did this reason tell you about? And what did this reason tell you about the grandfather? The answer for this question is that he plants the trees so our descendants will eat. This shows that the grandfather believes in caring for future generations and family is extremely important to him. And this is another moral too. Actually, I told you that we have 3 examples for these stories, and actually we have 4. I told you we have 3 stories, but actually we have 4, and this is the last one, which is playing Basara in Tata's room. In Syria and Lebanon, Basara is one of the simplest and easiest card games. Old members of the family teach the younger ones how to play it. And also, after going through these the events of this story, we will find an important question, and this is the last question, which is use examples from the story to describe Tata's character traits. Tata's kind. She takes care of the children and makes sure that they are happy. She indulges the children's pestering and offers them sweets. She's old. She wears clothing that the children find mysterious. Now we have finished discussing the article and the attached stories, and let's go through the highlighted words. Prefaced. Prefaced means began or said before getting to the main point. For example, this book is prefaced by a good introduction. Bargain. Bargain is a deal that is made with someone. For example, he had a great bargain last week. Compassion. Compassion is a feeling of sympathy for someone who needs help. For example, people should feel compassion to harvest. Harvest means to pick fully grown fruit or vegetables. For example, farmers usually harvest orange in winter. Adjacent. Adjacent means next to or beside. Inclement. Inclement means bad or severe. For example, Jack shouldn't leave because the weather is inclement today. Indirect. Indirect means not straightforward. The last word is ultimately. Ultimately means something in the future. For example, I had a long but ultimately successful campaign. By then we have reached the end of the video, hoping the lesson has been useful to you and looking forward to seeing you again in the next lesson.